Hi, everyone. We are so glad that you're here with us today. I'm Beth Francesco with the National Press Club Journalism Institute. Welcome to today's program on how journalists can leverage library resources to improve their research and reporting. Whether it's uncovering a new information source or helping to fact check your work, librarians and public libraries are a goldmine for accessing information and much faster than you may think. They can be a terrific resource to supplement the work of your newsroom research team. Thank you so much for being here and making the time to be here. Before we get started, we have a few notes for the audience as you get settled in. We have a live transcription option available during the program. If you're joining us on a desktop or laptop computer, you can enable this at any time by finding the live transcription button in the navigation menu. You'll just need to click on Show Subtitle and the captioning will begin. You can also disable this at any point by selecting Hide Subtitle. We are recording the program and we'll email a link to the video to you this afternoon. If you missed something, don't worry, you're going to have a chance to catch it a second time. We are also going to share a tip sheet and resources that our instructor will share during the program, and those will appear on our website and in our newsletter next week. And if you aren't already receiving our afternoon newsletter for journalists, you can subscribe now. We hope that you'll join in with comments and questions in the chat. Please feel free to open that now so that you can follow along with the conversation. We'll monitor the questions and we will get to them at the end. So feel free to add them to the chat at any point. We're going to hold off until the end of the presentation to let April respond to them. It's now my pleasure to introduce our instructor on this highly practical and important topic, April Hines. April is the Journalism and Mass Communications Librarian at the University of Florida. Her research areas are vast, but they include information literacy instruction for journalists, just like this morning. She has a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Florida and a master's in library and information science from the University of South Florida. And she's also co-authored a book, Collaborating with Strangers. I'm really excited to read that. April, we're really glad to be learning from you today. With that, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. Just making sure I don't want to get too far. Okay, so I'm so excited to be here. I'm really thrilled to see all of the interest in this program. What I want to talk to you today is how you can get behind that elusive paywall that hangs over us and leverage library resources for your research and reporting. So let's start with the post that started it all. So a couple of, back in March, actually, I was thinking about how, as the Journalism and Mass Communications Librarian here at UF, my job is to show student journalists how to find quality information, how to evaluate it, and how to leverage it to really benefit them and take their reporting to the next level. So I am constantly interacting with not only student journalists, but practicing journalists who remember me from their time here as students and still reach out to me as sort of their personal research expert, which I love. And when I sent out this initial tweet, I was thinking about, I'm constantly straddling the fence between the world of libraries and the world of journalism. And it's pretty obvious to me how those two worlds can intersect. But I don't know if it's always obvious to either side. I've had a lot of conversations with journalists where they have were very surprised by the wealth of resources that are available to them in public and academic libraries. And you can see Natalie Van Hoos, who might even be in this webinar right now. She is a science writer and journalist who responded to this tweet and said, yeah, I want to learn more about this. Would you consider doing a workshop for an org like the National Press Club Journalism Institute? So she's the one that actually spearheaded this and set this up. Also our colleague, Emily from Washington State University. So I really appreciate the two of them saying, this is actually a good idea. Let's make this happen. There's interest here. So we kind of brainstormed what we thought would be most useful to journalists that libraries can provide for you all to leverage. Okay. And I actually did get a ton of responses to that tweet, not just from Natalie and Emily, but from lots of other journalists, lots of other librarians. There's a pretty steady pipeline between the two. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of librarians being a resource for research assistants. And I know that many of you probably have interacted with librarians in a variety of ways, but sometimes I have to remind journalists that you can reach out to librarians to give you ideas of how to approach a research topic. What are some great search strategies? What are some good tools to use? What might be some resources out there that you don't even know exist? So these are some examples of questions I've actually gotten in my email and with local journalists here in the area, asking questions on everything about from the housing market in Gainesville to Native American history being taught in schools, to a prominent figure in Gainesville history. And so I was able to link these journalists with resources, with search tips, with archives, with data. And that's a big part of my job that I do every day. And I know many other librarians across the country do as well. The bottom was from a direct message I got from a journalist recently. I connected her with some archival materials, some digital resources, as well as some ideas of scholarly experts that she could interview. And as you can see, she replied that this was so helpful and showed the link between journalists and librarians, which I appreciated. So I want to get you all thinking about how can I leverage the librarians and collaborate with librarians in academic and public libraries. So if you didn't know, many librarians have a master's degree in information science. I also have a bachelor's degree in journalism, and I have 10 years of experience. So I'm essentially an expert on how to find and use information in the fields of journalism, advertising, PR, and broadcasting. And many other librarians out there have way more experience and knowledge than I do. So I want to give you an example of how you can work with public librarians for fact checking. So this is a favorite exchange that I had with an amazing journalist named Katie Hyson. She was here in Florida. I believe now she is in San Diego, I want to say, working for NPR there. But she had tweeted out that she had contacted a small town in Indiana to fact check something. And the Midwestern charm was real, but she was transferred from the city office to the mayor's office to the Chamber of Commerce. And she made lots of friends along the way. Everyone was really nice, but she still wasn't quite getting the information that she needed. And then I said, I responded to her and I said, you may have better luck contacting the library in that town. And I loved this response, the way I screamed and got on the phone so fast. I think that I encounter a lot of journalists who don't necessarily think of following up with librarians in a certain community to fact check or to find government or city information. But, as you can see, Roberta was on the case and got right on it. And then I want to talk to you all about subject librarians. You may or may not know that in academic libraries, many of us are in roles where we are subject librarians. So like I have a background in journalism, so I'm the journalism librarian. We have a psychology librarian, a chemistry librarian, an environmental sciences librarian, and there's over 80 of us, so I won't give you the whole list, but we each have subject expertise and information science expertise. So this was an example. Some of you may know of Cynthia Barnett. She's sort of the famous environmental writer and journalist. She also teaches here in the University of Florida College of Journalism, but she was working on a multimedia piece through their NPR affiliate with a group of students called The Price of Plenty, about chemical fertilizers and the steep costs to people on the planet. And she had emailed me and said, April, I am doing some background research. I have 2 separate data points. They're saying the exact opposite. And I need to figure out, like, I need to bring in some additional resources to fact check this and to make sure that I'm not making a mistake here. I'm finding a lot of conflicting information. So the first thing I asked her is, when is your deadline? When do you need this by? And she told me it was a few days later, within that same week. And I reached out to our environmental sciences librarian. I reached out to our government documents librarian. I think we might have even brought in some other science librarians. And before you knew it, we had a Google Doc going we were all contributing resources. We were kind of crowdsourcing, and she had a whole team of academic librarians helping her confirm these sources of information that she was finding. And if you go to this, I think we have a link. If you go to this piece right here, you can see that she very nicely thanked all of us in the acknowledgements and really credited our work in helping her do this background research. So just to know that, if you have a topic that's very heavy in a certain academic discipline, you can reach out to subject librarians, and it doesn't even have to be one in your town. It can be somebody who, has a lot of expertise in that area. And then just make sure you're upfront about, when is your deadline? What kind of information do you need? Do you just need help being referred to certain information sources? Or do you need something more concrete, like you need an actual data point to be provided to you? And it's my experience working with a lot of librarians and being in this field for 10 years that librarians will be very upfront to tell you if they can or cannot get you what you need by that deadline and how far they're willing to take you. Just make sure you have that conversation up front, or if they can't, ask if there's anyone they can refer you to. Okay, now I also want to talk about the value of the physical space. And I'm not keeping an eye on the chat right now, so I'll have to catch up with you all later. I see that it's getting bigger and bigger. So this is something that I find that a lot of journalists in the field don't always know. And it's the fact that, yes, academic libraries sign licensing agreements so that their electronic resources are only available remotely for their university community, but we're still public institutions. So because of that, anybody can come into the physical building, get guest access to one of our computers. Like you can see here, I have a picture of one of our guest access computers here in my library at the University of Florida. And once we grant you guest access in the building, you can use all of our proprietary resources, all of our subscription databases. We also have things like a Bloomberg terminal for looking up financial information, checking the market. And not just at my institution, but in most academic libraries across the country, or I should say many academic libraries across the country, you can enter the physical space and get guest access to use their subscription resources on computers in the building, or to use things like a Bloomberg terminal. I also found out the National Press Club Library has a Bloomberg terminal and some other in-library use resources that are really helpful. And I just want to remind you that even though it may seem inconvenient to have to go to the physical space, and I totally get that, but if you are working remotely and you want a beautiful place to spend time in, and you can see this is a picture just a few floors up from me right now, and you can maybe have a library research day and grab a coffee. A lot of academic libraries have coffee shops now, and just really hunker down and save articles to flash drives or email to yourself, and take advantage of those resources in the building. And then here's some examples for some databases that might make that worth the trip. Resources like that we have access to, and a lot of academic libraries have access to, like Statista, which is a statistical search engine where you can find facts, figures, infographics, reports on just about any type of information that you can think of. It's such a great kind of one-stop shop for data. Also resources like Web of Science, where you can not only get to academic research, but it has ways to narrow your results so that you can see what institutions are publishing the most about this topic. So that's a great way to find expert sources. Or also, who are the top researchers? You can also narrow by grant funding, who are the funding institutions that put the most money into these research topics. So these tools have all these different search features. Also resources like D&B Hoovers, where you can find really in-depth company profiles with financial information, or IBIS World, where you can find really meaty industry reports and market research. Going back to that project with Cynthia Barnett on fertilizer, we were able to find a report on the fertilizer industry in Florida, and it listed who the top players were, their funding, all kinds of information that was really useful to that project. Now I want to get into government documents. So, as many of you probably know, government documents that are released by the government printing office, many of those are now freely available online. But many libraries in the country are also federal depository libraries, where government information is sent to them as well. So if you're looking for recent government information, that may be freely available online. But let's say you were looking for a government report from the 80s, that might only be available in print form in a physical library. So if you go to the website for the Federal Depository Library Program, you can search, you can go right to your state and you can find the nearest Federal Depository Library to you. And you can trust that they've been required by law to collect and organize government documents. Going, all the way back many years. I'm not sure when this program started, but then also that there should be somebody there, a staff member who has above average knowledge on how to search for and use government documents. They may even know about some agencies that produce certain types of information and how to access them, whether that's online or in print. An anecdote that I can give you, I was talking to our government documents librarian, and she used to work at the Chicago Public Library. And I said, was there ever a time that you were working with journalists looking for government information? And she told me of a story about how there was a government agency in Chicago, and people were trying to figure out how this agency got started. What was their original charge? Have they been doing what they were supposed to be doing? And the actual agency didn't have their own founding documents. Nobody knew the origins, really, because it had gone back all the way to the 1940s. But the agency itself didn't have it. It wasn't online. But guess what? The Chicago Public Library had all of their annual reports going back to the very beginning in their municipal government information collection. So that's an example of kind of thinking outside of the box in how to access certain types of information. She even told me she knew of journalists who had submitted FOIA requests trying to get information from government agencies when it was already freely publicly available through their local public library, but they just didn't know that. Okay, archival materials. I'm sure many of you have accessed digitized archival materials online. If you go to your local public library's website or to many academic library websites, they will have some type of digital collections, digital libraries. But I just want to remind you all that there are a lot of archival materials out there that are not digitized, but could still have value, have historical interest to you for your research and reporting, especially when you're doing background research. So, for example, here is some of our collections here in the UF libraries, our archival collections. Everything from documents about historical information having to do with St. Augustine. We have a map and imagery library. We have manuscripts, architecture archives. And what can be digitized is usually digitized. But something that's important to remember is that if it's still in copyright, meaning that it's in that post, I forget what the actual cutoff is, 1920 something. Anything after that is still in copyright. So for example, there's certain maps that we can't digitize because they're in copyright and they were produced by a particular agency. So if you go to most public or academic libraries and look online for their finding aids, the finding aids are usually documents that list archival information by title. They'll tell you what items they have, what boxes they're located in. So for instance, if you looked in here in our finding aid database for civil rights, you may find archival boxes on NAACP records in Gainesville, different advocacy organizations, and personal papers for civil rights leaders. And so then you could then already identify what boxes they're in, what documents exist, and then you can contact the archivist ahead of time. They'll usually pull them for you. I think that it's kind of better for them to know that you're coming, and then you can access those materials in the physical library space. Okay, let's get into public library databases. This was really fun for me as an academic librarian to be able to look at different public library and state library websites and see what databases are available. And it kind of blew me away. Like, some of these public libraries have more databases than my academic library does. And I'm, one of the largest academic libraries in this part of the country. So for example, if you are in Michigan, I saw a couple people that said hi from Michigan. You can look at your local public library in your town. You can go on their website and see what databases they do have. I think some people forget that just like academic libraries, public libraries have databases too. But then also, if you type in your state and then electronic library, or your state division of libraries, the actual state government will sometimes purchase databases to make available to everyone in the state, and not just individual library, individual town library jurisdictions. So for example, if you're in Michigan right now, I was going through this list, the A to Z list of all of their databases. Anyone in the state of Michigan right now, all you have to do is either have a library card, or you could just log in with your Michigan driver's license or state ID. Michigan has access to Academic Search Complete. Like, I almost fell over when I saw this, because this is a major academic database that has access to so many journals, so many scholarly papers, and everyone in the state of Michigan has access to this. That's amazing. Also, a resource that's available through the Michigan Electronic Library is Gale and Context's Opposing Viewpoints. This is a great database for journalists because it lists hot button issues, controversial issues, anything that's sort of timely in the news, and then it curates a bunch of information resources and background information related to that public issue. So if you need to learn a lot about the alt-right before you cover a story or something that you may not know about, or opium addiction, you can find that and get some really accessible, credible information. Also, I saw a lot of you that registered for this webinar are in DC. The DC Public Library has some amazing databases. And just so you know, if you're not in Michigan, you're not in DC, check and see what your state or your local library has, because a lot of these databases are purchased by many different libraries. So if you're in DC right now, you have access to so many newspapers, it's ridiculous. So you have access to the Press Reader platform that has over 7,000 newspapers that you can read right on your device. Access World News, we have Access World News here at UF. That's over 10,000 news sources going back the last 30, 40 years that you can full text search from one platform. I'm sure many of you have access to your outlets archives, but now you have access to so many papers archives, and you can really background research so many different things that you would otherwise hit a paywall if you were on the open web. Yeah, in DC, you have access to historical Baltimore Sun, regional papers. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing that the wealth of news that you have at your fingertips. And many public and state libraries will provide access to some type of a news database. Also, demographics and resources for researching people and businesses. So in my state, for those of you that are in Florida, the Florida Electronic Library is a platform that is funded by the Florida Department of State. So it doesn't matter where in Florida you are. As long as you're on a Florida IP address, you can access any of the databases through the Florida Electronic Library. One of those databases is called Demographics Now. This is such a cool database because it allows you to access a ton of not just census information, but market research information. And then you can not only access it, but you can map it, you can rank it. You can do so much with it. You can even find consumer profile reports. So if you want to get to know the audiences in your community better, you can do that. You just put in your zip code and you can generate all kinds of reports based off of that zip code. A lot of public libraries have access to Demographics Now. Also, I saw, this is an example from the Evanston Public Library in Illinois. A lot of public libraries will have some type of access to Ancestry.com, which we know is great for doing historical background research on people. In this particular library, you can only use it on site, but I did see others where you just have to have a library card number to use it. We all know that Ancestry can be extremely useful, but very expensive. And then here's another example at the Denver Public Library. A resource that was called Reference USA is now called Data Axle, where you can find company information, industry information, residential listings. You can do reverse lookup. You can look for individual people's names. It's a great place to find background information on companies, on industries, and residents. So that's a powerful tool for any journalist. Okay, now I want to get into LibGuides. So this is probably one of my favorite tricks, and I know librarians use this a lot, but maybe not so much journalists. You guys can tell me. But many librarians, whether you're at a public library or an academic library, we create online research guides where we curate resources in a variety of topics for in a variety of formats. So anything you're researching, I do this all the time. If you Google whatever you're researching and then put the word LibGuide after it, you will likely find a research guide that a librarian has created on how to do research on that topic or in that field. So for example, if you're in the state of New York, you can see that this is a research guide that a librarian created on places to find New York City public records. This is a research guide from a library in Illinois. And if you're looking to do legal research or learn more about how to find court information, district court, circuit court, this is a research guide created by a librarian in that state on different types of free resources that are available. And with LibGuides, I will say that some of the resources will be subscription resources that are only available to that particular community, but then almost every LibGuide I've seen has some free resources on it, or a tab for web resources, or other things that anybody can use. And I was telling someone that it literally can be anything. Like you can Google craft beer LibGuides and find a research guide. So that's a really helpful tool. I also want to talk about Ask a Librarian chat. So many libraries have an Ask a Librarian chat feature where you can chat live with a librarian from wherever you are. This is really great because I know journalists are on a tight time frame. If you just have a quick question, or you maybe want to ask a librarian what's the best way to search for this type of information, you can hop on here. Most of our websites have like a chat widget where you can chat with a librarian. I will say, and I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but I've had people outside of UF message me and Ask a Librarian and say, I really need this article. And if it's a subscription article that I have access to and they don't, usually I'll just send it to them. Because I feel like a one-off like that is not breaking too many major copyright laws, in the sense that if you ask me for an entire journal, or if you ask me for an entire ebook, I'm not going to give that to you. But one article, I'm willing to take the risk. I can't speak for all librarians, but I have done that before. And then also don't forget about interlibrary loan. Interlibrary loan is a service that many libraries provide, where if your local public or academic library doesn't have access to something, you can submit a request and they will borrow it from another institution. So if there's an article that you really need, you might be able to submit an interlibrary loan request through like your local public library, and they'll borrow it from an academic library and send you the PDF. Okay, let's talk about WorldCat. So worldcat.org is a pretty powerful database because it allows you to search across library catalogs from all over the world. So you can search for a title, or anything by author, whatever you're looking for, and you can put in your location. Like mine has Gainesville, Florida right here, and it'll show you what are the nearest libraries to you that own that item. And I know as journalists, we don't have a ton of time to be like going out and grabbing books related to our articles, but this is an example of a time. This is from an article that I wrote profiling this writer, Lawrence Dorr, who had been nominated for a Pulitzer in the past. He just had a new book of short stories come out at the time. This is quite a while ago. But when I went to interview him, he mentioned to me that he had been interviewed and covered in a book where they went into detail about his life in Hungary as a child. And I thought, I got to get that book. So I looked in WorldCat. I found that a community college library near me had that book. I went and checked it out. And then I had an entire chapter that did a deep dive into his childhood in Hungary. So I was able to help use that to inform my writing when I was doing a profile piece on him. So. And then I want to remind you all that libraries can be a great place to connect with your community and find story ideas. So this story on the left was a result of me sharing a tweet from my library system about our citrus label collections. These citrus labels have been digitized and made available through our online archives, and we have even more in our physical archives. And I got a direct message from Gabrielle Calise, who is a culture and Florida nostalgia writer for the Tampa Bay Times. And she said, April, I have to know more about these citrus labels. Like, this sounds like it could be a really cool story, and kind of do more of a deep dive into that industry. What was the impact of these labels? How did this have an impact on people in that industry? So I connected her with our Florida history archivist, and he told her, oh, who you really need to talk to is Elizabeth Lee Barron from the University of Tampa. She's the one that really is an expert on Florida citrus labels. So then she went and interviewed her and got an entire beautiful feature story about the history of citrus labels in Florida. And then on the right, I want to remind you all that, public libraries especially can be right on the pulse of what's happening in their community. So if you're looking for a way to find people to interview, to find interesting things that are going on in your community, look at your library's events calendar. This is an example of an event where they had a community meeting on behalf of the Florida Springs Council. You can see that it was a huge interest in this community. The room was packed, and this actually was covered by our local paper. But I'm telling you, if you look at your public library's events calendars, you're going to get so many story ideas. Things that are kind of off the beaten path or that you may not think of. Libraries are a constant representation of interest in the community. So, all right, so that is everything I had for you all. Feel free to reach out to me via email, or if you want to follow me on Twitter, or I guess X. I would love for that as well. I'm happy to help refer you to resources, to other librarians, or help you if I can. I'm just really thankful for the opportunity to be able to share all of this with you. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I guess I can get started with questions. Okay. So Beth, it's all the questions that you DM'd me. Is that how we're doing this?
Yes, yeah, let's start with those, and then we can take others from the audience. How about that?
Okay, sounds good.
Great.
All right. Is there a directory or list of subject matter librarians or URL for that? How do we identify librarians' subject matter expertise related to our area of focus? So that's a good question. I don't know of any one complete directory of subject librarians in the country, even though that would be really cool. But I will recommend that you start maybe with the closest academic library to you, because most academic library websites will have a directory of subject librarians, our areas of expertise, and our research guides on how you can contact us. So you can maybe start there. Or if you use my LibGuide trick and you find a really great LibGuide that relates to what you're researching, then you can contact the subject librarian that's listed on that LibGuide. That's what I would suggest. To what extent are university librarians accessible by non-students or non-alums? Is open access available only at public universities? So I will say, again, I can't speak for all libraries and librarians, but I don't discriminate. So when I get an email, I don't go, oh, this is a community member versus a student versus a faculty member. I just answer the question. So I think that most, of course, public libraries are open to anybody. Academic libraries are public institutions, so we also serve community members as well. So I think that we really try to be equal opportunity to all of our patrons who need our help. Is open access available only at public universities or private universities as well? That's a good question. I know that public universities mostly have open or are open to the public. You can come in and use many of our electronic resources. Private universities, I think that's up to them, whether they want to be open to the public or not. So you can always check their website or just call ahead and see. And it's probably a good idea just to figure out what their process is for public access in the building, or if they provide that. And I can't definitively say that every public library or public institution at a university does, but I know most do. Okay. Would I be able to access individual science and medical journals through my public library or local academic library? Well, Barbara, it depends, because I think it would depend on what academic databases your public library or state library might provide access to. Like I said, if you're in Michigan, you have Academic Search Complete. So you have access to lots of data, lots of journals. So I would check and see what your local public or state library provides access to see if you might already have access to some academic journals. Or you could also try to go through interlibrary loan to get your public library to borrow an article from a university. Or you can try to just go into the physical space and then use any of the online databases if they're open to the public. I hope that answered your question. Is there an average wait time for response delivery from our library experts? Whew, that's a great question. I don't think there is an average wait time. I think there is times when I can get back to someone right away. There's other days where I have a really full schedule, so it may take a while. So I think you and the librarian want to talk right away about what your time frame is, when your deadline is. Be clear about when you need something by. I can tell you as a librarian, there's nothing more frustrating than when I spend hours and I'm finding all this great stuff and I pull together this beautiful email and I send it to a journalist and they say, oh, thanks, but my deadline was yesterday. So I need to know that up front, and then I can tell you whether I can meet that deadline or not. And if I can't, then maybe I can refer you to someone else. But it's very important to be upfront about time frame and deadline and exactly how much help do you need? Do you just need a few links to some helpful resources, or do you need someone to help you search and navigate? Okay, thank you for this webinar. I want to share with my university PR students. They struggle with where to look for their secondary research. This is a goldmine. It truly is. Do you find that millennials, Gen Z, are unaware of the treasures like this available in their own backyards? I mean, definitely. I think, and it's not just Gen Z and millennials. I think a lot of people assume that a lot of information is just out there, freely available, accessible, when really there's a ton of information that is not accessible freely online, or it's behind a paywall, or it might not even be digitized. So a big part of my job is introducing students to resources like this and showing them how to navigate them and how they might be helpful. Okay. Most are on JSTOR with 8 years delay for full text. How can we work around that? Yeah, JSTOR is a database that has more historical academic literature than current. I will say you might want to go and truly look at the list. If you click on research on the DC Public Library website, I did see some other academic databases in there. So you might want to or just ask one of the librarians at DC, are there any other academic databases that you provide access to? And they can let you know or not. Is there a central source of all of this fabulous info, guides? I don't think there is a central source, but I do think LibGuides are a great place to start, or looking at your, I would first start with looking to see what your state library provides, what your community library provides, and then what your closest academic library provides. But WorldCat is a great central location for finding holdings across libraries around the world. Sure, I can, we can share my contact info. Hey. Aw, thanks, Natalie. Okay. Yeah, for D. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just reading through all the comments. I wasn't sure if I missed any.
I think we got to all of them. April, you did such a thorough job. Oh, here's another one from Andy.
Any broad advice on getting resources from a state a journal isn't a resident of? Will some institutions only help residents of their state? So as librarians, we help anybody. I don't discriminate what state you're from when you contact me. And if I can send you an article or one report, I will. But more than that can get kind of dicey with licensing agreements. I will say one thing that I did see is for some public libraries, they do allow you to purchase a library card if you're outside of their jurisdiction, and it's usually pretty affordable. So if you know a public library system has some fire databases that would be really great for you, you can see if they offer the ability to purchase access. And just remember that you can check out your local academic library as a member of the community, and go in physically to see what they have available. Yes, making a research appointment is advisable, especially for archives. It's if you just show up and say, hey, what do you have about civil rights? That's not going to be as productive as like going online ahead of time, checking out their finding aids, checking out what collections they have, setting up an appointment, letting them know what your research interests are. And then usually, like I know our archivists here at UF really enjoy kind of getting that information ahead of time so they can pull a bunch of resources. Institutional repositories are great for academic research. That's true as well. So one thing that I would recommend is, and many of you probably already use this trick, but if you're searching for academic research, you can put in your keywords in Google and then do cite:/edu. So then it's only going to bring back results from educational websites. So you're going to get a lot of press releases talking about academic research from different universities and institutions, but also you're going to get articles that have been pulled from university scholarly repositories, things like preprints, dissertations, and those could inform your research as well. Yes. Sorry, can you say that again? Are you talking about cite:/edu? Yes, perfect. Yeah. Some schools provide remote access for their alumni. Yes, UF does not, because you have to pay even more for alumni. The universities have to pay a certain amount for licensing agreements for their affiliates, and then even more money if they're going to purchase access for alumni. So, that's why some libraries will have where you can only use a certain resource in-house, because otherwise, there they can pay for like access for 10 people versus 40,000 people. And the difference in price is a very big difference. But you can check and see if you're an alumni of an institution, do they offer remote access for alumni? Some do, some don't. Yes, so I mean, I can share my screen if y'all want me to. Let me bring up just a good old-fashioned Google search. So if I'm researching, I don't know, impact of drinking water on exercise, and I want to know what the academic literature says about that, I can do cite:/edu. I can even add in the word study. And then you'll see it showing me like press releases and articles from repositories about the effects of drinking water and exercise. And then you can even come here under tools, and maybe you want really recent research, so you can narrow your results by the past year. You can also do cite:/gov for it to bring back from government websites, and org, so it can bring back institutional websites for organizations. Okay. Yes, Jennifer says if you hit a paywall on an academic paper, you can check the author's university's repository. You might be able to find the paper, yes. And you could also check for them on Google Scholar to see if they have a Google Scholar profile. And then sometimes they'll also link to preprints of their papers, or where those can be found in an institutional repository. You can usually just Google the name of a university and then institutional repository, and it should come up.
Well, this has been so informative, April. It looks like we have one more comment from Barbara, and then maybe we can wrap up.
Yeah, I hope everyone learned at least one new thing that they're excited about.
I would say probably a lot of new things. And thank you so much, April. This hour has been just full of great tips and really practical reminders about the powerful information that's housed within libraries, and the incredible expertise that librarians just like you have to share with journalists. I've learned so much. I know our audience had a terrific, just terrific questions. And to our program participants, if you have also found this program valuable to your work, we hope you'll make a donation to help support free programs like this morning's. It helps us to produce programs at no cost to you and other journalists. We'll drop a link in the chat now if you'd like to make a donation. I want to thank everybody for being here and for the great questions. We're going to send a follow-up email with the video recording as well as a transcript. I saw that somebody asked for that in the chat, and a tip sheet with some of the resources that April referenced in the program. I want to take a little time here to let you know about another terrific webinar we have coming up next Friday, same time, with award-winning investigator Karen Baird, who we saw in the chat earlier. So Karen, glad you're here. She's going to share about her treasure trove of public records that you can find online. We'll share a link to register for that in our follow-up email, so definitely look for that email. And of course, if you're interested in learning more about the National Press Club's library resources here in Washington, D.C., the Institute does run the library. We're happy to tell you more about the resources that you have in our space. You can reach out to us at institute@press.org. We hope that everybody stays well. April, thank you again. And we hope everybody has a great weekend ahead. Thanks, everybody.